great. So I've got this little kind of PowerPoint here, just kind of talking about, like I said, community and sustainability. Um, so I'm just going to start with a bunch of thank yous because it took a lot of people to get this kind of series together up until this point. There's a lot of other theaters that I've been working with to get this together. So specifically Theater in the Round for hosting, and then USITT, which is taking care of the online recording here. Um, if you're getting back into theater, USITT is the United States Institute for Theater Technology. It's a big national
Okay,
organization.
that's good to
Um,
know. Yes.
so that's where the recording goes, is
Okay.
on their YouTube page, which is great. So I've done 3 other sessions prior to this one. So if you want to watch any of those, you can do that. But I'm Sadie. I'm a local artist and theater set designer. I have degrees in theater studies and arts administration from Viterbo University, and I have an architectural drafting diploma from Minneapolis Community and Technical College, which I think is just Minneapolis College these days. I started this chapter of the Broadway Green Theater Alliance. I helped start Next Stage, which is a rental place in Northeast of like furniture and prop type things for scenic things. And then I'm also a theater specialist at Schuler Shook, which does architectural theater planning. Um, so with the different presentations that I've put together for this sustainability series, it's really kind of some of the presentations are kind of like skills and knowledge focused, and then some of them are more kind of inspirational or philosophically focused. So the other 3 presentations, theater, how do I get started? That one's a little bit more kind of like inspirational framework thinking. The Broadway Green Alliance and other resources, that one's a little bit more technical because that's more of a like handing over resources. And then the last session that I did, material versus human sustainability with Karen Bratley with Theater Pro Rata, that one is again a little bit more kind of like philosophically based. So they kind of go back and forth in terms of like focus and things like that. Um,
Okay.
we list all of the upcoming sessions on the Minneapolis Green Theater Alliance webpage. So if you want to see other events that we're doing, because we have this whole series posted on that page, but I know we have the workshops that are hosted by Theater in the Round on Theater in the Round's page. Um, so that being said, the kind of rough structure that I'm following for this presentation is what is community and why is community important? Theater and community, and then when an existing community decides to be sustainable, and then when community is formed around sustainable values, actions, and activity. And then how do you sustain community? So really thinking about um, sustainability and community and theater and how that all kind of relates to each other. Because I've found that people work better in community. Generally speaking, that's why people, are a part of different organizations and things like that. And there's a lot of overlap with sustainability initiatives being successful and people actually wanting to be a part of them when things are done in community. So I just wanted to kind of take a presentation to really talk about like what does it mean to be in community with sustainability. So what is community? So this is pretty starting at the most basic of what is community. We need the need for connection and community is primal, as fundamental as the need for air, water, and food.
It's also
Um,
a yeah, it's also a very fun NBC show.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
um, definitely. So what is community? It's a group of people with common characteristics or interests living together within a larger society. Or community can be a feeling of trust, belonging, safety, and caring for each other. It can also be about shared values, norms, cultures, religion, customs, and identity, social and emotional bonds among people, and a sense of unity and collective purpose. So community can mean a lot of different things, uh, even in of itself. And we know that community is important because we're social beings. And I think that we all have a sense of like, I think part of the reason like people like doing theater particularly is it gives you that sense of like being a part of something greater than yourself.
Like camaraderie and like
Yeah.
singular parts of a whole.
Yeah, and I think it's also like particularly with theater, it's like you can definitely see how some things just can't be accomplished by a single person. Like you have to be doing things with a group of people to actually pull it off. Like the set on stage right now is a really great example because that's a very ambitious set. And then community also provides support for social networks and things like that. So I think that there's lots of reasons of why community is important, and I think we've all been in situations where we've kind of also felt like the power of community, like an experience feels more important when it's in community together. Um, and I think that there's also different kinds of community. Because I think you can think of community, I feel like this text is really small on the screen, but you can think of communities being centered around a place, communities being centered around an interest. There's identity-based communities, communities of need, communities of practice, and communities of convenience. So I think that there's all kinds of layers, and we've probably all been a part of
At
like,
least one.
if not one, like probably multiple different kinds of community and probably like different kinds of community at the same time. So just thinking of how, like in the context of a theater, like a lot of those are kind of relevant because it's like you can be building community because you're all in the same place together. You share like an interest. It can be like theater that's very identity, like rooted in identity type things. So I think particularly with theater, there can be a lot of overlap of like, why is this community forming? What are people getting out of it as well? And just emphasizing, I think it's like you know when you are in community with people, because you have that sense of being a part of something greater, and you can like have that sense of like a support system of when you're relying on things. I think sometimes in theater too, sometimes you can feel the reverse side of it, where you can feel like you're doing a show and you can feel like there isn't a sense of community. And it can be like some shows you can look back to and be like, wow, I really like that show because I really vibed with those people. And then some shows you might be like, I can't wait till this is done because like I'm just not vibing with these people. So I always think that that's also an interesting experience in theater, how
Mhm.
some shows just like really gel together and you really have that sense of like coming together and putting on a thing. And the reverse of it, sometimes you know when you're not in community with people too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, yeah.
A big part of community is kind of understanding the culture of a community. Obviously, different communities have different cultures, and I think again through the lens of like theaters and community, that's very true. Like just because like Minneapolis is a great example because there's so many different theaters here, and every theater, even though they're all, kind of going for the same goal, they each have like
Their own unique
yeah, their
identity.
identity, ways of doing things, things that are like socially acceptable and not socially acceptable. I think that's one of the great things about the Minneapolis theater system is it's like an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that it's like there's little like pockets of different kinds of theater. And so like you can kind of hopscotch around until you kind of find the right niche of like what type of theater do you like doing, what people do you like hanging out with, because there's all different kinds of culture with different things.
What was that saying about like if you want to get into theater but don't want to go to New York, go to Minneapolis?
And that's actually very true. I've heard a couple of different reasons for that. One of it is that we have one of the largest unjuried fringe festival shows, which just gives a lot of people an opportunity to make and create, which I think is great because there's also so many little theaters that, like, again, like just thinking of like there's the puppet theater, there's burlesque, there's devised work. There's all different ways. That's just a small handful. I'm not saying that that's an expansive list even in of itself, but
Yeah,
like
no, I wouldn't imagine so.
yeah, that kind of variety because like sometimes when I do shows out of town, sometimes I'm surprised when I get to a town and they're like, this is only one of the two theaters in town. And like I feel kind of
Oh,
spoiled in Minneapolis because there's so much theater. Like on any
there's a
Friday.
billion. Yeah.
Yeah, on any, weekend, there's multiple shows going on. So, um, but all of that to say that like each community has its own different culture. It has different values, beliefs, systems of language, communication, and practices. That's kind of big culture. Um, but culture is also a reference to a large, diverse set of mostly intangible aspects of social life. Because culture, like, especially as we're coming up to the holidays and all the different holidays that happen this time of year, I always think that that's kind of a great representation of culture and like those intangible things that go into celebrating holidays together. But culture also shapes social relationships and maintains and challenges social order. So I think that you might have a community, but you might love the culture that it's in, or you might say the culture of this place needs to change. So I think identifying community and culture kind of separately from each other is an important kind of step when we're talking about community. And I also think it's really important to talk about culture in relation to theater because theater reflects culture in a lot of
Or
ways.
yeah, theater is a type of media, and culture, if culture doesn't exist, media doesn't exist.
Yeah. This quote here, we can never get a recreation of community and heal our society without giving our citizens a sense of belonging. I also have my own phrase that like art is a mirror of life and theater is a really clear mirror. And so I think particularly with what we've experienced in the last like decade or so with like a pandemic, the variety of different social unrests that we've experienced at this point, you can really see the shift in programming that happens in theaters. And like, I think the stronger impulse for new work is really interesting and kind of reflects a cultural shift of like wanting to make sure other stories are being told. So I think seeing how theaters are reflecting culture is always an interesting thing to kind of reflect on as well. A phrase that I've used in some of my other presentations is this idea of the triple bottom line. And so the triple bottom line is a like metric of success for organizations that are leaning towards like a more sustainable way to define success. So not defining success only as a financial bottom line, but also keeping, because the triple bottom line is profit, people, and planet. And the that is like truly placing people, planet, and profit all in a line, like as a like you're not successful unless you have all of those. We're like super conditioned to think that profit is the only form of success for a business.
Sure.
But since people is a major part of the triple bottom line, that's part of the reason I really wanted to take this opportunity to talk about community and like what community means for theaters and in relation to sustainability. Because if we're saying that our impact on people and the impact on community is a way to define success, then we have to take some time to really think and reflect on that too. And most of the time I've found this like Venn diagram of the triple bottom line,
Yeah.
but then I found this infograph, which I think is also three pillars of sustainability is
Social, economic, and environmental.
hmm. So it's all kind of like similar.
Planet.
Yeah, I like the alliteration of the three P's sometimes.
Yeah, I like that. I like the Venn diagram too.
Yeah. But I like the image on the right because it's just like another way to think about things too.
Sure.
And also, documentary that I watched in getting ready for this presentation was it's on Netflix. It's called Join or Die. It's Robert Putnam wrote a book about bowling called Bowling Alone, and it's this kind of study of how social groups have gone down in American culture in the last like 50 to 60, 70 years, and what that means for like us as a country and as a culture as well. And I think for theaters, that is like such a community-based art form because it is like a collaborative art form that also like there's the concentric layers of community. I think that theaters like really hold such an important role in providing a sense of kind of like clubs or community. They give people an outlet to go to. So I just like to point this one out because it's a pretty well done documentary. So going a little bit more deeply into theater and community, because that was just kind of trying to talk about just about community. Oh, here's that quote that I've already said. Theater is a mirror, a sharp reflection of society. The greatest playwrights are moralists. Um, I've tried to sprinkle kind of a couple different kind of quotes throughout this presentation. So we know that theater is a collaborative art form. You generally need a reasonably large group of people to pull off a theater production, in kind of a broad sense, because you've got the people on stage and the people backstage. Um, the paragraphs that I have here I took from an introductory to technical theater book that I found online, and I'm just going to go ahead and read this. When working within a group, we must navigate differences of opinion, entertain varying perspectives, and rise to the challenge of maintaining clear communication. Learning to listen is an important skill in this scenario. Being clear in thought, exact in language, and deliberate in choice of illustrative examples can be key to success. Theater artists must learn the difference between giving up on our ideas when a strong voice is advocating for something different and defending our views to the point that we become an obstacle to consensus. I have found when artists listen closely and truly attempt to understand one another, they are often able to find solutions that incorporate and even enhance seemingly disparate ideas. Um, and I just thought that this was like such a great way to phrase collaboration. And I think it just kind of resonated with kind of the polarized world that we live in right now, this sense of like, yes, doing theater like helps us practice these skills of like listening and collaborating, and it is a beneficial skill to have, not only for ourselves, but for the people around us as well. And whenever you're like doing a theater production, I think a lot of community is created through collaboration as well. Like the best kind of collaboration in my mind is when like an idea starts and then by the time you're done talking about it, you don't really remember who started the idea, but you know that it's better through the conversation that you had. And I think those are some of the experiences where I know I've developed a lot of friends through productions. And so this idea of like community created through collaboration, because sometimes with a theater show, you're kind of, in some ways, you can kind of think of it as like put in a room with a group of people that maybe you've never met before, but you know you're all kind of unified towards the task of putting a show on. So by doing that, you end up creating community in the process by, having different conversations and things like that. Also within theater, I think that there's like different ways that you can look at community. And these are just some like kind of ways to think of community within theater that I know I've personally experienced because I've done theater for like since I was 10, which is like a long time now. But I think that you can find community if theater is like your job and you have coworkers. If it's a community theater or maybe a theater that you've done volunteer work at. You can find community through volunteering. There's the casts and the creative teams and kind of the community that's formed around that. And then there's the audience, which is kind of that shared experience. So I think each of these kind of represent different kinds of community, but I think it's really unique how theater can have so many different kinds of communities kind of overlapping all within the same building because I think the experience that like staff might have would could be very different compared to volunteers or a creative team or an audience and how they experience that organization and how there's like each of these kind of represent a group of people in and of themselves. I think that community can have kind of different layers to it too. So, and I think different organizations can have kind of different groups of people kind of driving the culture of an organization. So I think just kind of reflecting on like if you're in a theater thinking of like who's driving the culture, because I've been in organizations like in theaters where like there's some instances where the staff is definitely driving culture, but then you might have a different organization that is also a theater, but like maybe the audiences are driving the culture more so than staff. And I don't think that it's like right or wrong. I just think it's kind of um a thing to be aware of. And I think especially if you're trying to be intentional in developing culture of a community, like understanding who is the driver of community can inform how you might go about talking about culture and things like that. And great theater is about challenging how we think and encouraging us to fantasize about a world we aspire to. Um,
I heard that in his voice.
I know, right? This was one of those quotes, and then I read the bottom of it. I was like, of course, William Dafoe said that.
William?
That's how I've always said it. William? Willem?
There's an E.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another quote, theater was created to tell the truth about life. Because I know for myself, I've always thought of like the mess. I'm gonna sneeze. Oh,
Isn't it?
oh, it's that strange time of year where it's like allergies are kind of done, but like
Not yet.
not yet. Um, but theater was created to tell the truth about life because theater is unique because the medium of theater is humans. And so like you have this very unique art form that uses humans to just like again, if we're that mirror reflecting things back, like it is such a literal like reflection back of like what the human experience is about. And community, there's kind of this intersection of like what what community is formed with like broader society as well. At the Guthrie up in the Dowling studio, there's that quote, a community can be measured by the questions its theater asks. And so here I think of in Minneapolis, we have this vibrant, theater community. And like, definitely not everyone in Minneapolis or the surrounding areas come to theater, obviously. That is just not really how it works. But you can think of how different this city is with all of the theaters that it has, the little theaters sprinkled in the streets, as we kind of mentioned, versus a city that might not have theaters and how it just has a different kind of vibe to it. So kind of that extra layer as we're thinking about what community means within a theater and then how a theater affects like the larger community that it might not have a direct relation, like direct commentary with, but just by existing kind of has an impact on society. So with the work that I've been doing with theater and sustainability, I've generally seen kind of like two trends of how community is formed in relation to sustainability. And I think that there's kind of one method where an existing community decides to be sustainable. So that's one path that I'll talk about. And then there's another path where community is formed around the value of sustainability. So kind of like the genesis of where the community is like developing in relation to sustainability would impact how a theater might go about creating a sustainability program or statement like that. One of the quotes that I added, there's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And I think that this will be particularly relevant for theaters that kind of exist already and are deciding to be sustainable, or deciding that sustainability is a value, because this will be um, a way that the theater can like see how it can have a different kind of impact than they maybe had before. So most theaters, when they start talking about sustainability, we're going to start at a high level point. We're going to start talking about value statements. So usually there becomes some kind of awareness of like, I think we should care about sustainability, which is kind of how those conversations start, just like that. Like, I think we need to care about this. And so what starts as a value statement and like an awareness will then be followed up with intentional action towards making sustainable change. And like I said, those first conversations of like, I think this should be a value can manifest themselves in many different ways. Um, and I think, again, going back to the thinking of that slide about who's driving culture, like this kind of raising the question of values, like being aware like who in your community is starting to say this should be a value for us will kind of inform how you'll go about putting a sustainability program together. And then again, when you are a group of people that is starting to wanting to incorporate sustainability as a value, you're going to start with, values and a lot of intentional work. Because you're going to be changing existing behaviors, you're going to start doing different behaviors, and then you want to do some intentional work to normalize that new value as part of your day-to-day culture and decision-making process. So there's a lot of intentional work up front when you're a community that's deciding to incorporate this value into your group. There's a fair amount of questions that you can ask yourself when you're starting with sustainability. Is there any low-hanging fruit, kind of obvious choices that you can just start doing differently? What are things that we can do as a community that aren't reinventing the wheel? Because there's lots of sustainability actions that a community can just start doing without feeling like we're doing something massively different. What systems exist around us that we can start to utilize better? Can we do a recycling drive in relation to a show? Because I think of how with theater, you have a fair amount of community coming to a show, and whenever you have people already, have that pattern of gathering together, sometimes with these recycling drives or collections, it's an additional thing that you can do to help kind of the larger community be involved in kind of expressing this new value statement. Other questions you can ask yourself, who are we helping by making these choices? Who aren't we talking to and who isn't in the room? And what can I learn about sustainability by building a new relationship? So again, these are questions that you can start. This is just a couple, it's not an exhaustive list, but these are questions that I've used when working with theaters that are starting to do more sustainable practices to kind of understand um, what are things that we can immediately start doing? What are some areas of education that we need to work on? Is everyone on board with this, or do we need some work to get people on board? So I'm a really big believer in any kind of sustainability journey of leading with questions because what we know now is going to be different in 2 years about ourselves, but also about sustainability, because the science is always out there and developing. So whenever you can approach sustainability with questions, you're gonna long term ensure the success of sustainability rather than me just saying, this is how you do it.
The more questions you ask, the more you're able to keep up, essentially.
Yeah, and it also gives you more of like a mind of interrogation and a way to approach the world rather than thinking like I did my checklist and now it's done. Because also when you look at sustainability compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago, we're in a very different space of understanding. So when you approach things with questions, over time you'll be able to adapt and flex differently. And eventually, over time, intentions become strategy. Um, and so, like, I find with some theaters too, there's always kind of this like initial question of like, there's some points of view that will say like you have to do an audit first to establish a baseline, which I think is a way to do it of how to develop a strategy. But sometimes when you're just trying to understand what does this value mean to us as a community that says this is a value, like sometimes being able to just like start doing some action helps. And then coming in with an audit can be a way to do it. Because sometimes an audit can be very daunting and overwhelming. And I don't think that like the need for perfection of like starting with an audit should prevent people from making change of like the low-hanging fruit that's out there. So that's where I say like you're going to start with a lot of like upfront work, changing behaviors, and eventually that's just going to become normal habit and that's going to inform strategy as you move on as well. And then you also have to find the right fit for your community because sustainability is a huge term. It's very broad and it means a lot of different things to different people in different contexts. Like there's some theaters that just will be able to have different agency with material sustainability compared to other like smaller nomadic companies that just don't have the resources to be building giant sets like that. So there's some theaters that might have a stronger focus on like the human side of sustainability rather than like the material side of sustainability. So that's why I think for theaters, this is a really interesting kind of intersection to come together when we're talking about material versus human sustainability, because some theaters might do really well at the human side of things, but not have the material side down or vice versa. Or
Or they
like,
could have something different that they're good at.
yeah, and like, again, those are just two examples because sustainability is a huge umbrella too. Um, but I think part of finding the right fit for your community is starting by establishing shared vocabulary and an understanding of what sustainability means for this community in this culture, in this context. So I think, again, that kind of assessing what is the right fit for the community, because like there might be some folks that like say we're really interested in the human side. We can't take on the material side of sustainability. And I just say, like, every production that you do, if you've done one more sustainable choice than the last one, that's great. And just a shout out to Theater Pro Rata, who I've worked with. They have definitely done a lot of work in this last year defining what sustainability means within their organization. So a lot of that conversation starts in an internal place for most theaters. I don't think it's necessary for theaters to like start with like a public facing like sustainability statement as a starting point because I think you should do some internal work of like when we say sustainability, what does that mean? Because we don't want to be greenwashing at the same time. And there are some examples of like theaters that have like decided to be more sustainable. Like the National Theatre in the UK is a really great example of like a traditional theater that has really done a great job of adopting a lot of sustainability principles and values into the work that they do. And I think the National Theatre is a really good example of like scalability of theater that can say, yes, we want to start doing sustainable things because I think I think that there's a perception sometimes that only small theaters can accomplish sustainability goals, but really any theater can do it. It's just whether you're willing to
Do
like
it.
do it and like do the change that comes with it too. Oops. Oh no. Okay. So that first kind of group was about an existing kind of community deciding to be more sustainable. But then there's also community that is formed around sustainability. One of the quotes, community is much more than belonging to something. It's about doing something together that makes belonging matter. So this might be something where, like, particularly in sustainability, there's lots of different kind of sustainability communities that exist out there. These are just a couple ex of like examples to like how deeply ingrained it is in your life compared to like neighborhood organizations. So there's like eco villages where like you can just move to, a neighborhood or a place where like that is just how they live in sustainable practices. There's advocacy groups, community gardens, community clothing swaps. There's all kinds of ways that community that sustainability already exists in our society. That if you as an individual are wanting to do something around sustainability, there's lots of different outlets. So that's where I think theaters can like look to some of these kind of existing examples in the sustainability community and kind of learn from them to understand like clearly people are drawn to these organizations based off of the values that they have put forward in the world. Um, More and more as I've been doing different reading with sustainability in theater, I hear this term eco theater come up quite a bit more. The two presentations ago, I did kind of a listing of organizations and the resources that they offer. And I think more and more theaters are putting sustainability as a value on their webpage. Um, we do know that the UK is doing quite a bit better at no one's surprised, right?
Yeah.
Um, they have, I know in that presentation of resources that I gave, quite a few of them are UK based, and then you can see how the theaters in the UK have already started adopting that at a faster rate than American theaters. But like I said, this term eco theater is becoming a little bit more mainstream. I don't know that this is something that we would have seen as a term 5 or 10 years ago, but more and more theaters, are starting to use this term eco theater. And there's a couple different kind of key principles of eco theater. So just kind of reading some of this, eco theater is a form of theater that prioritizes environmental sustainability and awareness. It involves the use of eco-friendly materials, energy-efficient practices, and waste reduction strategies in all aspects of theater production, from set design to costume creation. The key principles of eco-theater include minimizing waste and reducing environmental impact, promoting environmental awareness and education, using sustainable materials and practices, encouraging audience participation and engagement in environmental issues, and collaborating with environmental organizations and communities. So I think as society progresses and sustainability continues to be more and more of a thing, I think we will continue to see more and more theaters kind of adopt sustainability and eco theater as a practice. So just a couple different kind of existing theater companies that exist that are already doing this really well. This is just a short list. Actually, Hooligan Theater Company, I think, is based out of California.
Oh,
So I wanted to start with a
nice.
with an example that was in the States here. But when you just start Googling theater and sustainability, you can start to kind of come up with different theaters that have put this value forward. And I think that this is a great place to start to just see how different theaters are starting to represent what sustainability means for them. Which is why, kind of back on my previous slides, you'd have to do that internal work of like, what does sustainability mean for this particular organization? Because especially as you look at the theaters that do have sustainability out there, there's a big range of like what that means.
I think I saw, yeah, I was looking at the Guthrie's website and I saw that they were working on something like a garden of some sort that was,
Oh,
yeah,
maybe.
I, I could be making that up, but like I just remember seeing, something about like, in order to be sustainable, we're building so and so
Oh,
over here. And, yeah, I just remember seeing that.
oh,
So,
I'll have to check that out. I wasn't aware of that.
yeah, yeah, I only glanced at it though, so
Okay.
details might be fuzzy.
Yeah, and that's kind of a great example of how like again how sustainability can manifest itself differently because like being able to plant a garden is something that some theaters can do but other theaters can't.
Yeah.
Um and then here at Vamos, this is a mask-based theater in the UK. I really liked the bullet points that they listed out on their website for intent. So they put continue to embed environmental sustainability and climate justice into our activity, to grow our sustainability knowledge as a team and understand what makes a difference, to act with manageable and authentic aims, to use the carbon handprint concept, which puts the emphasis on actions that have a positive impact on our climate crisis, to gather clear, precise, useful data, to embed a practice of minimizing harm. Anyways, I like how very kind of action focused each of these bullet points are. And like this is a very different kind of way of representing sustainability compared to like the other websites that I kind of showcased. And even here, like there's lots of theaters that are like starting to put sustainability forward, and we're starting to see some like theater groups where like climate change and like sustainability are like the focus of like the programming that they do. So there's ways of like discipline and internal practices around sustainability, but then also like what stories are we telling? Because at the end of the day, a theater is all about telling stories, and a lot of the programming that you do dictate, tells people what your values are in action. Um, so I like to talk about climate change theater action because this is an international festival that happens every other year. 2025 is a year of the festival, and the theme this year is The Time Is Now. And this is a series of very short plays. So playwrights are commissioned to write like less than a 5-minute play. And you can buy the book, and then anyone in the world can participate in the Climate Change Theater Action Festival.
Nice.
It's September through December, so we're like in it right now. I did purchase the book this year. Um, I think my favorite one that I read was a play about fungus. So just like another kind of example of like how theater and sustainability are creating community beyond like an actual building. Like this is an international festival that anyone can just decide to participate in, which I think is cool and interesting. And then bringing it back to Minneapolis here, I just want to highlight Mixed Blood, which is just down the street from where we are right now. They have their equitable dinners. They have an equitable dinner that does focus on climate justice. I have been able to attend this. So you can go check out Mixed Blood's website to see if they have one of the sustainability focused equitable dinners coming up, or you can help host one as well.
Ooh.
Pretty exciting stuff. And then again, the being the Minneapolis chapter of the Broadway Green Theater Alliance, I like to think that hosting these workshops is a way to kind of put moments of gathering out in the Minneapolis theater community so that people that are interested in sustainability have an opportunity to kind of come together and see the community around that.
I say it helps.
Yeah, and then the recordings are there that if you're like
Yeah.
coming in at a different point, because like we all have these different realizations of like, no, I think I do want to do sustainability. The recordings are there that you can kind of go back and listen to things as well.
Right.
And how do you sustain a community? And I would say that this could probably be like a presentation in and of itself in some ways. But we're just going to touch on a few high level things. We cannot live only for ourselves. 1,000 fibers connect us with our fellow men. And among those fibers, as sympathetic threads, our actions run as causes and they come back to us as effects. Just kind of again speaking to the importance of community. So being able to sustain a community, um, many people define sustainability as the ability to maintain or support a process continuously over time, which when you look at sustainability in relation to community, like being able to sustain a community is like a concerted effort in and of itself. Because again, doing things individually can be overwhelming. And I think also like most of us have probably experienced like some kind of community organization kind of like ebbing and flowing over time. So I think when you're talking about sustaining a community, I think being aware that there are those ebbs and flows, and like when we're talking about sustaining a community, it's about supporting something continuously over time. And so just being aware of like how community can change and develop over time, I think is the first kind of step of like sustaining community. I think that there's other different ways to help support community. There's listening to the community. There's having the ability to flex, adapt, and change. Making sure that you're engaging people, because again, if you're an organization that's wanting to serve community, but you're not engaging people, are you really doing that? Aligning actions to interests to support what the community has to give or are interested in engaging with. And I think also leading with integrity are just a couple of different ways to kind of support community. But I'll just kind of wrap up with never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. It's indeed, it's the only thing that ever has changed the world. So with that, it's
Amen.
there's a little presentation there of just thinking about kind of sustainability and community and how those two things kind of live in relation to each other.
Wonderful presentation.
Great, thank you.